Welcome to the Benaiah shift. Today I'm joined by Megan Dogre, a digital marketing strategist, podcasting expert, and author of Podcasting for Business. Megan has helped small business create podcasts that are not just consistent, but practical, strategic, and profitable. She's the co-founder of One Stone Creative, where she and her team focused on building business podcasts that actually support growth, marketing, and measurable results. This conversation is especially important for business owners who are podcasting or thinking about it, but want to do it the right way. It's really a pleasure to have you on the show, Megan.
Aaron, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to share what I can. That'll be useful.
Megan, what was it like growing up?
Growing up, oh gosh, I think I enjoyed it a great deal. I'm Canadian, and growing up here means getting to spend a lot of time outside, sometimes in a very interesting weather. Right now, it's as the time of recording, it's wintertime, and we're having a good old-fashioned a Christmas with lots of snow, several feet deep. And so growing up meant often learning to walk on ice and figuring out how to walk through snow that comes up to your waist.
Wow. Wow. That was really a lot. Right. So Megan, you often say not every business need a podcast. Can you explain what you mean by that?
So, I specialize in business podcasts or podcasts that do specific jobs for business owners. And as everyone listening here is running a business or thinking about starting one knows, that can take up a lot of your time and a lot of your energy. And so there are some situations where when you invest in any new content project, you want to make sure that it's going to pay off, right? So I often recommend if someone's a very new business owner, if they're in their first year or so of business, it's probably not a great time to start a podcast for a lot of them because you've got to figure out how to sell, figure out how your operations, figure out your finances, all of this stuff. It takes a lot. And so adding another whole project can be too much. And then there are some businesses where what they need or the way that they kind of build relationships and get clients is not really suited to podcasting. So say your company that does manufacturing for other big corporations, there may not be a lot of room for content marketing that's going to be really useful where it's more person to person or like networking events or there's trade shows. So it really depends where your business is, what your business needs, and kind of what the norms in your industry are. Now, that said, if you're in a business and you're like, I'm not sure if a podcast will work, well, there's no harm in trying and seeing if you like it and seeing if it works. But if you're going to be experimenting, you've got to make sure that you've got kind of the flexibility with your time and with a little bit of budget to give it a really good shot and be able to evaluate whether it works for you or not.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much, Megan. I think it's the fact that you make reference of not all business can thrive, but when it comes to podcasting, especially the years of actually more like starting out, has a whole lot to say about it too. And the fact that those who are just in their first year, they just have to kind of stay put to the business first and figure out how marketing works compared to just more like diving into marketing. And I think that's very intriguing. So what are the differences between a personal podcast and a company podcast?
Ooh, that's one of my favorite questions in the entire world. Thank you for asking it. I'll start with a personal podcast. And I mean, so I consider there are three different types of podcasts. So there are passion projects, and this is something that you do it because you love it. You love the craft of it. Maybe you love creating content. You write scripts, you do audio dramas. Maybe you yourself talking to people, or you do true crime stuff just because it's a passion. And that is a great reason to podcast. And then there's the second type would be podcasts that are started to be businesses. And these are podcasts they're going to try to get big. They're going to try to get sponsors. They're going to kind of be built as businesses in and of themselves, without selling other products or services. And the third type, the business or the company podcast that I specialize in, these are podcasts by business owners who have totally separate businesses. They exist already. They sell things, maybe in finance, HR, creative, PR, marketing, business consulting, whatever. And the podcast is only useful if it's useful to the business. And so a company podcast or a business podcast, in my way of thinking about it, it's a tool that a business owner designs to do specific things. And maybe that's connecting them with people and helping to build relationships. Maybe it's getting ideas and IP out there for like brand awareness and brand authority. Or maybe it's to, nurture leads and help them make buying decisions more quickly. But whatever the purpose of the podcast is, it's in service of the business and doesn't really exist outside of the business. Whereas the other types of podcast, they don't necessarily need another business attached to them in order to be interesting, to be valuable, or to exist.
Amazing. Thanks for the difference. I think the fact that you differentiate it between those who are passionate and who later lead to business and the other one who are accompanying and owing to what they do and how it's relevant to the outside world. It's really amazing being that you get to consider this particular different end or to know where you get to stand as a podcaster. So you have worked with business podcasts for years. What mistake do you see or that repeat itself the most?
A really big one is kind of the biggest one happens at the beginning of the process when people are thinking about having a podcast and they think that a podcast has to be a certain way. It's got to be an interview. It's got to release every week. It's got to be 45 minutes long, and that's kind of like it's got to be a podcast. When really a business owner is going to have a lot more success with podcasting if they start with their business goals. My business needs more clients. I need a shorter sales cycle. I need to be more well-known in the industry. And when you start with that and you design a podcast to do just specifically that thing, it's going to be a lot more successful a lot more quickly. Because what usually happens, and this is the mistake, is someone starts a podcast that is just like a standard best practice podcast. It's, as I said, releases weekly, talks to guests, all these things. And then that takes a lot of work and it doesn't always result in anything measurable for the business. It might have benefits, but they might be unclear. It might be hard to attribute the value directly back to the show. And that's fine if it's a passion project. And that's fine if it's a business of it itself, like that has the goals built in. But if you are, say, an accountant, or if you are, if you do plumbing or construction, or you work in something, you need to know that this project you're investing in is going to have a return that you can measure on your bottom line. Because you don't, as a business owner, you don't get to just keep doing it because it's fun. You have to have the numbers to back it up. You've got to be able to say, this is what the podcast, what the tool I am building is doing for the business. And so kind of not making that decision early on in the podcasting journey, that leads to pod fading, that leads to kind of quitting, that leads to just things not working and ending up on the shelf.
Amazing. Thanks a whole lot. I think the fact that you just speak volume to capturing the purpose of what the podcast is meant for. It's very key before I actually get to starting out, so that at the end of the day, frustration is not going to lead in. And the fact that it's measurable too. You can measure a result to see am I really achieving my goal, or to what extent am I actually achieving my goals. And I think it's very lovely way of looking
Well, I
at
was going to
it and
guess, I
taking
think, because,
everything.
you've got a named podcast, right? It's the Benaiah show. So I'm going to guess, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that one of your goals is probably to get your name out there and to get your own intellectual property out there and become known.
Yeah.
And so that was a really good strategic choice for you.
It's so true. You caught me there. Yeah, thank you. So why do you believe that downloads are often the wrong metric for business podcasts?
Another good one. It's because they don't tell you very much. So downloads are the easiest metric to get, right? It's easy to log into your podcast platform, into Apple or Spotify or whatever, and find out what your downloads are. And it's useful to know, like, generally how many people are listening and how that number changes over time, or more people or fewer people listening. But that doesn't tell you anything about your balance sheet. It doesn't help your income statement. It doesn't help with much of anything else. Usually downloads are often good to keep an eye on, but they don't actually tell you something meaningful that you can act on later on. There's a couple exceptions to that, like when if you have a sponsored podcast, for example, downloads equal dollars. And so downloads are very, very important. But if your goal is something like building new referral partnerships, where, you're talking to guests who might refer business to you and you can send business back to, downloads don't tell you anything about how well that is working. You're going to have to track that separately and figure out some other way to measure whether or not you're getting new business from the guests that you have. Downloads aren't going to make an impact there for the most part. And so downloads are important when they're in relation to something else, like dollars, like email subscribers, things like that. And they can give you interesting information, like, oh, this topic is really popular, or, oh, every time I have a super long title, I get a ton of extra downloads. That's valuable to know, but it doesn't actually move the needle business-wise for the most part. When other things like, new referrals, labor cost savings, these can all make a really big difference. And so I think they're usually more important to track. And because every element of tracking takes time, only track what really matters. Like I've got, for my podcast that I've had, I check downloads once a year when I'm doing my reporting, because it's just not a metric that really matters. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't move the needle. But, I track my referral, my networking stats. I check those every month.
Wow, amazing. Thanks for that. I think it's very, very key, especially for business, being that at the end of the day, for business is going to be the bottom line. What was the rate of conversion? What is the reference rate that actually more like come through the channel or the funnel, compared to having a whole number of downloads? At the end of the day, the metrics is not meeting, the cash flow is not showing.
Well, exactly, right?
It's
Because
going
like,
to
I mean,
forfeit.
if I got 10,000 downloads tomorrow, that would
Yeah.
be cool, but it wouldn't mean anything to my business other than
Yeah,
like
so true.
it would feel good. I'd tell people about it, but like it doesn't unless it results in like more sales or save time or something else, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so true. So true. So where does a podcast truly fits inside more like a marketing funnel? Where does it actually fit it?
So that one's going to depend a little bit on the business and about the kind of the goal that you're trying to achieve with the podcast. So there are podcasts that exist at the top of the funnel, and they are designed to kind of go out and help, meet a bunch of new people, get into the ears of a whole bunch of new people. This is the most common reason people start a podcast, and it's the hardest to do because, as you'll know as a host, getting people to listen is a real challenge, and growing that audience is really, really hard. And the shows that do it the best, like the top performing shows that get those tens of thousands and thousands of downloads, they have really big marketing budgets for their podcast.
Yeah, so true.
A lot of time and money is being spent on that. And so that's a top of funnel podcast. Then you've got kind of mid funnel podcasts. And this is where I think things start to get a little more exciting. Because a mid funnel podcast is somebody they've found you by some other means, maybe by email, they saw you on social, they were introduced to you. And the podcast is a tool that you use to get to know them. And that's really fun because you can use the same podcast to get to know a whole bunch of different people better. So you're engaging people and networking and kind of nurturing them, building that knowing, liking, and trusting at scale. And so they've heard about you, they go to your website, check you out, and it's like, oh, a podcast. Maybe I'll check this out and listen to a couple of episodes. And then they listen to a couple of episodes. Okay, I like I'm picking up what this guy's putting down. I've got to get to know this better. And that can really move someone along the funnel a lot more quickly. And then there is the kind of the final level, the end of funnel podcast, where podcast is being used as a selling tool. And this is what I would call quite advanced podcasting or it's because it's hard to do it well. Nobody wants to feel like they're being bait and switched or that it's a sleazy kind of salesman thing. But that said, if approached delicately and, kindly and really respectfully, it can work. If you're talking to someone about technology and you happen to mention at the end of the conversation, well, I've actually got a product that solves this problem. Would you be interested? That's fine. That's cool. But it's usually going to be a longer term thing where you talk to someone and they remember, 6 months, a year later, oh man, actually, I really need podcasting help. I better call Megan now that time has passed. So those are kind of the different ways it can fit in. My favorite, as you could probably tell, are the mid funnel ones where podcasts are used to nurture at scale.
Wow, amazing. Used to nature more like a scale. I think this is very, very key, especially I think the interview I was having the other time that speak volumes to a particular, how will I make reference? A particular route, a whole lot of prospects pass through before they actually more like make more like a buying decisions. More like they have to come in contact with either the products or more like the person, more like let's say the key person of influence who is in charge of that particular product at least 7 times before they actually get to make that decision.
Yeah.
And I think from what you just make reference of in here, it's pretty volume being that through podcasting, they get to understand the face behind the brand. They get to understand why they do what they do, what the thing is meant for. And I think that is more like a very robust way to actually more like add up to those hasting those particular points so that they could get to make their decision faster compared to if it was not there in the first place.
Exactly as you say, with all of those different touch points. Because like say you even have like a short podcast season, you do 12 episodes. Well, if somebody listens to your whole season, they've had 12 conversations with you, or they've made dinner with you 12 times while they were cooking. Like true. That's huge in terms of like how much and I see this with our clients all the time. Is when they start podcasting, they start getting on the phone with people who seem like they know them, So it'll be someone calls you up and just like, oh, hey, old friend, how's your cat doing? And they're like, excuse me, how did you know I have it? Oh, it's well, I talked about my cat 3 weeks ago on my podcast, right? And so it's
I think it's the crazy part about more like having more like showing up in the media like this, either through podcast or through more like any other means. There's a point where more like clients get to interact with you so much, and there is no switch in the brain that speak volumes to you haven't actually met this person in real time. They'll just figure it out that I know them the way I know my person. Like being that they have interacted with your content for a very long period of time, and now it becomes so real that it doesn't even appear to them. Because I remember I actually have something like that at a particular point. I went to a particular more like a particular event, and I saw someone that I've been watching their content about a lot of time. So I just reached out and say, hey, hello, how are you doing? How's everything? And the person was like, did I know you so well? I have to rethink as oh, where did I get to? Also, oh, sorry, I watch you so much on YouTube.
Well,
That I get to.
I know. I find
Yeah,
the
it was.
same thing as a producer, right? So I listen to my clients' podcasts and we do all this work with them. And so I get I feel like I'm really close to them. And
Yeah, so
they know
true.
me and they like me, but it's not that close. And so I have to be careful when I
Yeah,
get on the phone. It's like, actually, we're not best friends. This is a professional relationship.
yeah, amazing, amazing. So, can a podcast replace a marketing channel, or should you just support them?
Well, for some people, the podcast is their main marketing channel. And it's I know that's how I use my podcast personally. Is podcast is the only content I create typically, and I use it for all of the different channels. It feeds my newsletter, it feeds my LinkedIn, and I've got a new show starting in the new year that's going to feed like Instagram and all that other stuff. Because small business, limited time, I'm only doing one thing. That's
Yeah,
all I'm
wow,
doing.
amazing.
But for bigger organizations, especially and big organizations, or if you've already got content marketing that's working really well, like you don't want to, to use the proverb, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't stop doing things that are working. Just because, so in those cases, a podcast should fit in with other things. And to figure out kind of how that works, you want to look at the buying journey. You want to look at what your conversion is like from different sources. Maybe you notice that, hey, every time you do something on video, like a little short or something on LinkedIn or Instagram, boy, that performs really well. And that
Yeah.
might be like, okay, so maybe then a gap in my content could be filled with a video podcast. And I'd get more of that engagement that's really positive. So I don't think it makes sense to start a podcast just to start a podcast. But I think if you're doing no marketing, then a podcast can be a really efficient way to fill a lot of channels with one
Yeah,
work
so true.
product.
Yeah, so true. Thanks for telling more like that particular advice. It's very, very key being that it can serve a whole lot of purpose, not just as a whole. It's a whole lot of clip can actually be gotten from a particular episode that could actually more like fill other channel. Okay, so you have created more like a business or podcast blueprints. What problem
Yes.
were you trying to solve with that framework?
Okay, so the real problem I was trying to solve with the business podcast blueprints is why the heck is no one making money from their podcasts? To start. So basically, we figured out after I was producing for a couple of years, looking at the podcast industry, it's a beautiful place. And there's a lot of really good information out there, but most of the information and the advice is for hobby podcasts or for podcasts that are business, those first two types that I talked about at the beginning. There wasn't a lot of advice for podcasting when it is just a part of a bigger business.
Yeah.
And that I found was a really interesting gap because, B2B or business podcasting has been growing hugely over the last couple of years. Lots and lots of companies are realizing this is valuable. But if you follow kind of the passion podcaster advice or the business podcaster advice, it might work well for your business, but it might not. So I wanted to develop a way that, say, a business owner who's in a non-podcasting industry could design a show that was going to make sense. So that they could do that kind of quickly. And if not get it perfectly the first time, at least get really close the first time to something that is going to be revenue positive in their business. And so by working with a bunch of different business owners in a bunch of different industries and by doing a lot of research every year into the top 100 business podcasts, we were able to really kind of reverse engineer different types of podcasts that can fulfill different types of business objectives. And it took a little experimentation and a little back and forth, but we were able to distill it down into a model or a framework that people can take and use in their own businesses.
Wow. This is really amazing and it's worthy of actually taking note of.
The real
Especially being
secret
the
is I'm
fact
a
that
giant nerd.
wow, amazing. So how do a business decide whether to run more like a solo show or an interview-based show or private podcast?
So that's it's part of the business podcast blueprints. May I explain them really briefly just for folks who are listening? Perfect. So there's 5 business podcast blueprints in this model. There's relationship building shows where the main purpose of the podcast is to connect you with other people on a one-to-one basis. Audience engagement is where you're trying to you're trying to do that engagement at scale, engage many people at one time. Thought leadership is all about getting your ideas out into the world. Content is just about creating content, and conversion is about changing people from one type of relationship with you to another type of relationship with you. And so depending on which of those is the most important to you, that's going to dictate what kind of show it is. So if what I need from podcasting for my business is new relationships, a solo show is not going to help me that much. So I'm not going to have solo episodes very often. But on the other hand, if thought leadership is the most important thing to me and getting my thoughts and my intellectual property out there, well, then I can't spend all my time talking to guests and talking about the cool stuff they're doing. I've got to talk about my stuff too. So solos are going to make a lot more sense. And that's how you make those decisions. Something like audience engagement, where you're doing that at scale, you can do a little bit of both, but I always recommend at least a couple of solos because solos always outperform interviews. So if you
Yeah.
want to do that, people like the host they listen to, they want to hear from them. And so I think, always make your decisions based on what's the most important thing that the podcast is going to do for the business. And when you kind of have that decision filter, that makes making that type of decision a lot easier. And for private podcasts, as you asked about, that's often a conversion strategy where you're using your podcast to get people to subscribe or to opt in or to pay for it. And so that can be any type you want. That's valuable enough for somebody to kind of make that leap for you with.
Wow, it's amazing. Thanks for actually more like giving us this blueprint. I think it's very, very key being that every persons who are looking forward to podcasts, either more like from a personal perspective or from the business perspective, get to kind of sit down and actually set their goal, right? That, okay, why is the reason why I'm actually more like starting this podcast? Is it to actually more like gain more relationship, audience engagement, for leadership, for content, and various other ones? And owing to that, they could actually more like ascertain whether they are going to be more like solo episode where their thoughts actually speak volumes and what's their perspective and everything, and where they need more engagements, or is it more of a relationship where they need to kind of bring in a lot of persons, being that podcasting is a lovely way to actually connect a whole lot of persons, connect with different audience, not just yours alone, but from those guests you actually more like bring to the show too. You get to connect with their audience too, and think this very lovely way of actually more like getting it. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Oh, absolutely. No problem. I had there's a great example of this. I had a guest on my podcast last year, and he was entering into a new industry for the first time. And this is a case where a new business owner might want a podcast. He didn't have a lot of contacts in the industry, so he started a podcast, and he interviewed 200 experts, leaders, influencers, bloggers, other business owners in his space. He kept in touch with them. He knew 200 people in the industry, and then when he was ready to launch a product in that industry, he had this great list of people that he had a relationship with because he had been podcasting, and he was really successful. Like, that's, if you put in the time and if you do the follow-ups, that can really take you far.
Yeah, so true. Amazing. So how much time and money should business realistically expect to invest before seeing results?
So from a time perspective, for most podcasts, you want to give it at least a year, 18 months if you can manage it, because most of the things that you're going to achieve from podcasting tend to be longer game than shorter game. They just take time to develop. That said, for some businesses, especially for like the audience engaged, the mid-funnel type, sometimes you don't need to podcast forever. Sometimes you just need a season that does one thing really, really well. And so you just do 12 episodes. They're great. Maybe updated every couple of years, right? So it's super dependent. And in terms of money, you can spend as much money as you want on equipment and on post-production and all this stuff. But at minimum, make sure you've got a good mic and you're using it well. And in terms of how much editing you should do, or, either, yourself spending your time or paying someone to help you do it, what I tend to recommend is look at the other podcasts in your industry, and you just don't want to be the worst one, right? You want to be at least that minimum standard. So you don't have to be the best, but you don't want to be the worst. So that's, if you're on a budget, just try to be like a couple of clicks above kind of the lower tier in your industry.
Wow. Amazing. I think looking at that as a business is very, very key. So that at the end of the day, you will get to kind of produce something that no one is willing to listen to. And even you are too even shy and ashamed of what you actually get to produce. And I think it's it's lovely we get to look at it. So how can business owner repurpose podcast content without burning out?
Yes, I mean, the first and easiest option is to pay somebody to do it for you. And, even if you can't start there, that might be a nice goal to work towards in the future.
Yeah.
But something that this is it's going to come down to your goals for the having the podcast again. And so if you know that your podcast content is going to be on all of your social channels, and you are using your podcast to feed the machine, you probably want it to be pretty good quality in terms of like your audio video. Because you're going to be using that audio and video everywhere. So you want it to look as good as possible. So in that case, invest a little more time and energy in like a great recording setup and having a nice background and having good lighting, that kind of stuff. And then your repurposing is going to be easier because everything looks good. So you can just chop it up and send it out. The other thing almost everyone is going to want to do is get a transcript of that podcast episode.
Yeah.
And you may not need to like have it, perfectly edited and polished, but it's something that AI and the search tools, they cannot do yet very well is search audio. But text is very searchable. So if you want to be able to look up something quickly and find the quote quickly, being able to like Control F or just search a database for topics is very, very helpful. So the best kind of AV quality you can manage is going to make it easier to get out into other places, and having a text version is going to make it easy to search. And if you can do those things, that's going to be really, really helpful. And in terms of what you should repurpose, I have to convince you, I'm a lazy woman. I'm a very lazy woman. And so I do not like doing any work unless I have to.
Okay.
And that means for me, in terms of like content repurposing, I don't repurpose all of every episode. You know, but I do. The parts that I really want to repurpose tend to be the stuff that I'm creating. Like I value the conversations I have with my guests, super interesting, super valuable, but they usually just exist in the episode and in the newsletter that goes out about them. But the outros that I write, I do long kind of outros that are transferable to a lot of people. That goes to more places. That goes onto the blog, that goes into different places. And it's easy because I script that out, so it's already written. So you've really got to think about what matters for your business. What content do you need? Design your podcast to make those things that you need easy to extract. Maybe that means doing like a segment in your podcast rather than trying to hunt and find the best part. You know, you're always going to have like a quick tip before the outro. And you'll always know exactly where to extract the tip so you can pop it onto YouTube Shorts. So just think like a lazy person and make it as easy as possible for yourself.
Right. I think this is a very lovely way of actually getting at it, because I think before now I get so tired to actually more like repurpose contents, being that I have a whole lot of content that to work on. But with this, I already make plans to actually more like get to do that next year. Or being that my show personally is more like to actually more like build a relationship. And while doing that too, I want audience engagement. So with that, I have to start looking forward to more like a shorter content every now and then to gain more view. And so that within the attention span that I'm able to kind of get across a whole lot of persons and let them see more like some striking points from my interview with guests, and they get to see that, which draw them into more like listening to the full episode. And I think adopted this is very, very key. Thank you.
One thing that can work really well, especially for an audience engagement type thing, is, and if you want to grow your reach and more audience, have a little segment in each episode where you talk about another podcaster and say, hey, I really like the show. That's really cool. And then after it's released, just send them an email. It's like, hey, just so you know, I shouted you out. Don't ask for anything. Just say, just so you know, they're in this episode. They're going to listen. They'll probably tell people if you said those things.
It's so true. I think I'm definitely going to start measuring something sometimes, because even in between, sometimes some of my guests end up measuring that. Yes, so true. Why? Before I actually more like coming to your show, I listened to this particular podcast, and it actually helped me to face this and this and this. I'm like, oh wow, that's amazing. So what role does workflow and system play in keeping a podcast sustainable?
Like it's like the circulatory, it's like the beating heart of your podcast, in my opinion. So, I'm in a bit of a different position when it comes to being a podcaster, because we produce, multiple shows every single week. We do a whole lot. So making sure that, every piece is in the right person's desk every single day is really, really critical. But even if, say, you're doing it all by yourself, you don't want to spend more time organizing than you have to. And so having a really good system from the beginning is going to help you. And knowing, okay, first I invite the guest, then I do the guest prep, and then I record the interview, and then I write the intro and outro, and then I do the editing. Having it all written down step by step is really, really helpful. And the bigger your show is and the more people are involved, the more detailed you have to be. Because, especially if you've got, say, an assistant who's helping you with the podcast, you don't want them asking you every 10 minutes, what's next? Who's the next guest? Where's this thing? What do you need for this? No, they need to know. And so I recommend that people have a single source of truth for their podcast, where it's always possible to see, this is where every episode is in terms of production. This is what's coming next. This is the stuff that's finished. Some people really like spreadsheets for this. I'm a big fan of Notion. I don't know if you use it, but that's being able to have like a Kanban board of where every episode is so helpful. And so I think having a really good workflow, especially one that, where you can easily delegate areas, because, a lot of people, we start off alone. And, we don't have help doing all of this stuff.
So true.
But then when you do get someone to start helping you, even if it's like a VA who's just doing a couple of tasks a week, being able to integrate them into a system that you've already built is way better than trying to get them to figure out a mess that only lives inside your head.
Yeah, so true. Because it can get so overwhelming sometimes. Especially when
so many moving parts.
Much, and you are really able to kind of do a whole lot of intense work. Because I think that was one point where I get to one point and I was like, whoa, I'm already figuring it out. Definitely. Next time I'm going to get more like a VA to make the system easier for me. Being that I think this year, I think I started out that was 4 months ago, or 5 months ago. And over that course, I've done like, up to like 100 episodes and at one point it was
That's awesome.
overwhelming that so how did I get to kind of work on this editing, releasing and everything? The workflow was crazy.
Yeah.
But just what you just make reference of now, that was what actually more like helped me in saying, okay, which one did I do first? How were I able to reach out to the guests? Okay, after reaching out and publishing, how do I send an email to them to say, okay, your show is live? How do I do this? So it's having more like it's a workflow, actually more like reduce the burdens of being overwhelmed, and because sometimes it can just feel more
Yes.
like you just figuring that in your head, not knowing that you have not
Yeah,
released
and
any
it's so
episode
much
yet.
work in your head, right? And even the smartest person with the best memory, it's just too much. Like you've got to also
Yeah, so
we're
true.
businesses. We have whole businesses to run. We can't spend a whole lot of mental place on have I followed
Yeah,
up with the guest? Like it shouldn't live in your head. It should live somewhere that you can consult. So once it's in there, you don't have to think about it. You can just go check
yeah,
when you need to.
so true, so true. So what advice would you give to small business owner who feel overwhelmed by podcast?
I guess it depends on the type of overwhelm.
Okay.
So there's people who are overwhelmed by the technology of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
someone they want to try podcasting, they think it could be valuable, or even they know that like, man, I get all these relationships that would be super valuable for my business. But oh my gosh, how do I start? Where, what? So I think if you are really like overwhelmed by the technology of podcasting, the first thing you should do is be a podcast guest and go be on other
Mm,
people's podcasts a couple of times because you'll get to see their workflows. You'll get to see what tech they're using. You can even ask, hey, what mic are you
yeah.
using? Hey, what recording platform are we in? Hey, how are you making your graphics? You can ask these things.
Yeah,
Hosts
so
are
true.
perfectly happy to tell you. So then you can learn a bunch of stuff that might really work well for you. And you'll still get content you can use as the guest of a podcast.
Yeah.
But they're doing all of the production and all the workflows and all that stuff. So it's a great way
Yeah,
to get your
so
toes
true.
wet without jumping in completely. And if somebody is overwhelmed because they just think they don't have time to do the production, you've got two options. Well, no, maybe you've got three options. One is to not do it because you're busy. And if you're busy because you've got so many clients you can barely handle it, you don't need a podcast. You're fine. But if you're busy because, you need more organization or things like that, you can hire help and, help someone get a podcast, maybe to just help with launch or with the editing. You can hire
Yeah.
for individual parts of the production process if you want to. And the other thing, and this is one of my favorite strategies for someone who's a first-time podcaster feeling overwhelmed, start with the season. Don't start with a podcast that's
Yeah.
going to go forever. Start with 10 episodes. Start with 12 episodes. Just do those and see how it goes. See if you like it. See if it works. See if your audience likes it. Sometimes people do podcasts and they're like, you know what? I hated this. I hated everything about it. And so if it was just a 12-episode season, you can put up with it for 3 months, but you don't want to have to put up with
Yeah.
it for the next 6 years. So
Yeah, so true.
start small.
So true, so true. Start small, but keep figuring it out. I think for me, when I actually get started, owing to this imperfection and because I was not more like a technical person when I get started. I think before I get started, I didn't have a laptop, just my phone, and I usually
Mhm.
have this idea being that I work in the space of the blue collar entrepreneurs. I do more like I do painting, and also I run more like cleaning, industrial cleaning too. So I have my team that gets to work with me. And owing to that, being that I've been working with that for 2, 3, 4 years, when it comes to more like relating with tech and everything, at one point I was like, "Are you sure I can operate laptop? Are you sure I'm willing to show up for this?"
Yeah.
It was a bit crazy for me. I think it was one of the quotes during this particular episode. While I'm just talking to a particular guest, and we just make reference of this particular thing. And I think one of the quotes that was very released was, "Let it first begin, and then you
Mhm.
can make it better." So
Yeah.
that just more like removed the burden from me. That let it first begin.
Yeah.
You can't improve what is not
It's
existing yet.
so true. It's so true. And I mean, I'll tell you something. Almost everybody's first episode sucks. Mine
Yeah,
does.
so true.
Like the only time like first episodes don't suck is when they hired professional producers, like actual like
Yeah.
film and TV people to like do it from the ground up. Most of us don't do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I always like to have people after they've been podcasting for actually 100 episodes, like yourself, is a great time to do this.
Yeah.
Go back and listen to your first
Yeah.
one again. And just see how far you've come. See how far
Yeah,
you've
so
come
true,
and
so
be
true.
proud because it's exactly as you say. You got to start. That's the only way to
Yeah.
get back. The only way out is through.
Yeah, so true. Because I felt I was so nervous the first episode. I didn't even
Mhm.
know in between the episode I was actually more like make reference of it. In fact, the guests got to know, I was like, this is my first episode, being that I was very nervous. It wasn't easy. Over on and on, it became easy. I could have 2 to 3 guests on the show at a particular time, and being able to converse with them without freaking out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really been amazing. Yeah. So if someone is listening right now and want their podcast to directly impart revenue, what is the first thing they should see?
So the first thing they should do is just for a second forget about the podcast and think about the business. What does your business need to be more profitable? Do you need more leads? Do you need a better reputation? Do you need a shorter sales cycle? And then once you've kind of got one or two of those kind of stuck in your mind as these are things that the business really needs to be profitable, to be sustainable, look at your podcast and say, is it helping me do those things? Is the podcast actually helping me with my real tangible business goals? And if the answer is yes, good, keep doing it. And if the answer is no or not enough, well, then you want to go back and look down to, can we optimize the show to do it better? And that can mean a lot of things. It might mean changing your follow-up. It might mean adjusting your workflows. It might mean changing how you're recording. It might mean changing the whole concept of your show. That's that it's different, or deploying it differently, or using it different ways on social. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can optimize a podcast to help you drive more revenue. But you can't do any of it if you don't know what the goal is. You have to have that really clear. I need my podcast to be bringing me, say, a new client every month in 2 years. Cool. Now you've got something to work towards. And now you can be like, okay, so I'm going to talk to guests who might be really good referral partners. And I'm going to follow up and make sure that, I'm making it easy for people to refer me and that they understand, like, all of these things. And it really, it can vary so much from business to business, but the foundation is always the same. And it always starts with your business. What does the business need? Can the podcast do it? And is it doing it well? And that's I think what business owners should be doing. And I think that should be a conversation that you're having, with your podcast regularly. Is like, hello, podcast, are you being useful? Let's make sure that you are.
That's true. Yeah, I think it's very lovely idea being that sitting down to actually more like see it in terms of your goals. How does this help? What change can it does? So that very way it can get to inform you whether to kind of double down on it or more like think about this in other strategic measures. So that at the end of the day, the bottom line is, it's still going to be very well. So that it won't be as though you are taking out time, spending on this, and at the end of the day, it's not measuring up. That would be more like a very disadvantaged point to be when you didn't get to kind of reevaluate every of those things that's actually going on. Yeah,
sure, but
thank you, Megan.
it's better to know now than it is better to learn in 2 years.
Yeah,
if you need to cut your losses, cut them.
Yeah, thank you. So, Megan, what is going to be your final words to my audience who are still more like, I'll still between the options on should I actually more like I'll do podcasting in terms of either personal for those who are listening or that of business and everything. Being that you have actually more like gone through the journey, not just from the business aspect, but personally too, what will be your final words or advice?
I think final words of advice, as it relates to podcasting is just get out there and try it. As I think is start small, figure out one thing you want to achieve with a show. And if you are kind of feeling that overwhelm or you're feeling like that, maybe that's too much of a business risk to take on right now. You know what? You can do a lot of it by being a guest. So go ahead and be on other people's podcasts. You can still network. You can still share your IP. And so I think, just always keep in mind you're a business owner first and a podcaster second.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the most important thing to remember.
Wow, I think the final way to just make a face of is more comforting being that you're a business owner first before becoming a podcast. I think that just more like strengthens one to say, okay, even if I don't do very well in that, but I'm still a business owner, so it doesn't take anything out from me. So just why don't give it a try and see how it goes. Yeah, thank you, Megan. So how can my audience connect with you, do business with you, and where is the best platform to do this?
So you can find out everything you'd need to know about us at onestonecreative.net. That's ONE stonecreative.net. And when you're there, you can find more details about the blueprints. You can get a free copy of my book, Podcasting for Business. You can get a free PDF download of that. And it goes into some great detail about how to do this stuff. And I'm always hanging out on LinkedIn. Presumably, I'm going to guess that the link will probably be in the show notes, wherever you're listening to this.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Megan, and thank you for bringing clarity and honesty into the topic so many business owners struggles with. Your approach to podcasting is refreshing because it's practical, strategic, and grounded in real results. For everyone listening, Megan has a free video trainings on top 3 mistake business make with their podcasts, and you can find it out at onestonecreative.net. Thank you for tuning into the Arab, and I assume if this episode helped you to rethink podcasting, share it with your business owner who needs to hear it and who needs to see it. It's really a pleasure having you on the show once again, Mega.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.